Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Sosine and today we're going to make a festive holiday version of a Regency coat called a pelisse. Hence, I've nicknamed this video Pelisse Navidad. Initially, I was going to make a 1950s holiday suit dress to match my car, but I honestly hated the muslin mock-up so much that I immediately sacked that costume, threw everything in the trash, and decided to make something else. I had no idea what I was going to make, so I reached out to my friend chat for ideas. The one request was that I had to use the 6.5 yards of this gorgeous red silk wool that I had bought. The incredible Abby Cox gave me this amazing idea to recreate the Kyoto Costume Institute pelisse. Of course, this is different from the pelisse, and I immediately jumped on the idea. Oh my god, and for some reason I keep thinking of pelerine instead of pelisse. This is a pelisse and we are going to be making a pelisse today, and I just jumped on the idea. I really just loved how it was the Regency version of the white Christmas gown, which I think is like on every costumer's bucket list, just because it's just such a beautiful, like wintry, perfect Mrs. Claus dress without being overly not sexy. So the idea was to make a Regency coat in time for Bridgerton and watch it on Christmas Day while wearing the coat. So initially I heard rumors that Bridgerton season 3 was supposed to come out on Christmas Day like they did for season 1. Gideon, stop that. Of course, now the season's been delayed till May and that sucks for all of us, but I still want to make the coat just because it was the perfect thing to make. And this is a fashion plate that I've loved for years, and I'm so grateful to Abby Cox for giving me this idea. So first off, let's talk about pelisse. What is a pelisse? Originally, the garment in question referred to a short, stylish military jacket, extremely tightly fitted and decorated in gold or silver braids in the front, as well as the sleeves and so forth. And this often also had a fur trim along the collar as well as the sleeves or the front, and you'd see it often slung over the shoulder like a cape. It was the military uniform of the hussars. But of course, military uniforms became popular everywhere else as well. At some point along the line, women's clothing started to take elements of this coat and put it into it. Notably, it became the name for an 18th century fur-lined coat. Again, remember the fur at the neckline? This coat, of course, is fur-lined, and you could see this influence for the pelisse, and this is actually also called a pelisse. Pelisse also refers to a fashionable coat in the early 19th century, also known as the Regency period. This was a long floor-length coat that was empire waist and often high-necked, just like the military jacket as well. And you could see the original military influence because it was often trimmed using braids or, of course, rulo or other types of trim, oftentimes in military lines and braid as well. And of course, that's the type of pelisse we are making today. If you're interested in doing a deep dive into this and learning a lot more about it, the incredible Kenna Leibs has an article about it on FIT history, and I shall link that below for anyone who wants to read it. So now that we've discussed what a pelisse is, let's talk about making this particular pelisse. For those of you who don't know the KCI, the Kyoto Costume Institute is a museum in Japan that specializes in fashion, both Western and Eastern, and they probably have some of the greatest and most beautiful pieces out there. Like, if there is a beautiful example of it, it's probably in the Kyoto exhibit. They've preserved all of these so well, and then they put these together in some incredibly beautiful and fabulous outfits and photograph them for their books. The original pelisse appears to be made of a red wool broadcloth, which of course makes sense considering its clear military roots, and trimmed with red braid that matches very closely in color, but is not actually like the same fabric, and then covered buttons of self fabric. It has a very high neck collar, and the Regency era also just had very high collars for men. I actually do think that this probably went above the chin because this neck looks a little bit too long. As for that absolutely amazing hat, I commissioned mine from Shocking Bad Hats, but we'll unwrap that one later. Now, for the coat pattern itself, I looked to patterns of Fashion One. They have a great pelisse in there. However, I remembered that Black Snail Patterns has a very close pattern to this, so I just went and bought and downloaded that pattern because I didn't feel like enlarging this and drafting my own today. As for the fabric, as I mentioned, I already had 6.5 yards of this incredible silk wool from New York designer fabrics, so I went with that. After all, I'm currently in an Airbnb and I'm limited to the fabrics that I happen to have on me. Yes, the original was made of pure wool broadcloth, but I thought that this shiny, silky fabric was still gorgeous, and since it's wool and silk, it's going to be warm and make a fantastic coat. So now that we have an idea, a pattern, and fabric, let's get started making this. I initially started by printing out and cutting out the pattern by Black Snail Patterns. I worked with this pattern before, but since then I've grown a couple of sizes, and so I cut out the pattern in my size, taped it together, and made a new muslin. I did need a few tweaks here and there, but that's not unusual. And so I pinched them in, sewed it up, tried it on, and when I liked it, I copied that onto the original paper pattern and cut that out. I also cut off some cotton iron-on interfacing for the front and the center back for support, as well as the lining in linen. In the past, I've always used a cotton muslin for the flat lining, but in this case, my cotton muslin was actually destroyed while I was making the changes. Once I had the bodice pieces cut out, I then ironed on the stabilizer to the front and the backs. Honestly, I regret doing this. If you're going to go out there and do the same thing, I suggest ironing it onto the lining rather than the fabric itself. The iron-on pieces just didn't work quite the way I wanted. It was a little bit more too stiff, so I highly recommend that. Now it's time to flatline. Flatlining is when you get all the fabrics and sew them together around the edges, wrong sides together, right sides out. This gives extra strength and stability to the garment. It's a very popular historical technique, and I personally find that I use it probably like 90% of the time. So once all the individual pieces were ironed, pinned, and then flatlined together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I then used a 5/8 seam allowance to sew all the pieces of the bodice together using my Baby Lock Soprano with a 2.5mm stitch with silk thread, the back to the side backs and the side backs to the fronts. I made a point of ironing all the seams open between steps and just sewed the bodice together. For the sleeves, I initially used the pattern just out of the box, but I ended up taking out a lot of it. It was just very bulky, so I took a little bit from the sides as well as cutting in the middle. But honestly, other than that, I thought that the pattern was pretty perfect all the way through. I then lined the sleeves in soft linen and sewed it together, again flat lining it. You'll notice that the sleeves of the original jacket go down pretty low, all the way to the knuckles. This is a Regency specialty, and I decided to embrace it, even though sleeves that go all the way to knuckles are kind of annoying on a daily basis and might be annoying on a daily everyday coat. But you know what? I do think it does add that Regency flair. I did draft the collar by changing up the pattern piece, adding in some height as well as changing this the shape of the front. Also, the coat for this actually does make a slight V in the front, so I actually needed it to change the length. So what I did is, after I cut up the pattern, I actually measured around the neck with a ruler and then used that number. This works surprisingly well. I love it when math works. As for the skirt, I initially looked at the pattern from Patterns of Fashion by School of Historical Dress. This is from book 1. They have a really great pattern. It's surprising, it's a little bit tapered at the top and not just rectangles. So the pattern by Black Snail's pattern was pretty close to this. So I just used what came with it and it worked really, really well. The one thing was that the original pattern in Patterns of Fashion has some pleats at the side underneath the bodice, and I did put those pleats in as well, but then actually I did go ahead and end up taking out those pleats because I just thought it just added a little bit too much fullness in the front. If you want to take it out, I take about 4.5 to 6 inches of fabric from the skirt pattern by Black Snail pattern as well. Then I hemmed the skirt and the front and the sleeves, and it was time for trimming. Now the trim of course could be its own video because it was about 25-30 hours of work. For the trim, I decided to use rulo instead of braids. Now the original Kyoto Costume Institute Pelisse has the matching braid, but I have no idea where I would get a red that would match so perfectly. And if the red was slightly off, I was worried that it would look kind of awful. And let's be fair, I really love doing like fiddly little things, so I chose to make the rulo instead. Now, most of you may not know what rulo is. Rulo was a popular Regency trim technique where you get strips of your fabric and make little like worms with them, like long worms. You can, of course, just sew a tube by machine and then turn it inside out. I find turning those inside out to be like really emotionally stressful. So I prefer to just cut out 1 inch wide strips, then iron in a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each of the long sides and then hand sew them into tubes. I did make around 2 yards of those, but I also made around 20 yards of the same tubes with cording inside for more stability to make it look a little bit more military. I then drew in lines for where I wanted my trim to go on my coat using chalk and then sewed these down. The way that I sewed it was I would connect it seam side down onto the chalk side and then just do like a whip stitch all the way through. This was slow and took, hours and hours, but it was really fun and I got to listen to a lot of audiobooks while I did it. I actually made it through all of Stephanie Garber's Once Upon a Broken Heart series, so really highly recommend that. For the neckline, I also added in the rulo trim, but here I did it without the cording just because that makes it a little bit more flexible. I also covered some horn button molds from Burnley and Trowbridge. Mine are 3/4 inch and sewed it onto the coat. I also added in some hooks and eyes as closures. Honestly, this was the most annoying part that I dreaded for some weird reason because closures are my least favorite part of sewing, even though it takes like 30 minutes to an hour and is absolutely necessary. I used giant hooks and eyes that I got from Burnley and Trowbridge and I sewed those in. Now, while I do plan on making the whole of the coat all the way down, I ran out of time before I want this video to go out. But I did go all the way to the knees and I'm pretty happy with that. But honestly, even going though as far as I did, I really love it. It really doesn't look unfinished to me. And I have to say, I really liked how it came out. I plan on finishing this at some point, and I'll share those photos here and on Instagram. Well, while the coat isn't done, I'd say it's done enough. Let's do the final reveal. Since all my Regency gowns are currently in storage and this is supposed to be like an everyday coat instead, I decided to style this dress coat with one of my daily wear dresses. This one is from Linen Naive. I got a cheap fake fur muff and scarf from the internet and wore it with the coat. Oh my god, I got this incredible hat from Shocking Bad Hats. I sent Rebecca the original fashion plate and asked her what she would suggest. She suggested I go with the military theme and go with a shaker hat. Oh my god, I love this. So that's what she did. She kind of just took the plate and like took it as an inspiration jumping off point. As for the gloves, the original is worn with some dark red gloves, and I own a pair of dark red leather gloves, so I just wore those. And there we go. Time to go for a stroll around town. I love this coat. I've put everything I use down below and I can't wait to pair it with other looks as well. But honestly, I love how versatile it is since I can turn literally anything I'm wearing into a Regency fashion plate now. I also have to say, I really also love that this looks like my favorite character from Bridgerton, Lady Danbury. Well, that's my video. Thank you so much for watching. I want to work on a cottagecore daily wear an 1840s dress next, and thanks to the generous help of Burlesque Brigade who sold me their Sophie pattern, I think that's what I'm gonna be working on next month. Meanwhile, please don't forget to subscribe so you can see all of this. Have a great December.